Hi everyone, Sickothony Mode Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the brand new Beirut record, Gallipoli. This is the fifth full-length album from Zach Condon's own Beirut, a band that originated in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and shook the indie scene well over a decade ago at this point with their novel fusion of indie pop and folk with the sounds of Balkan folk and some brass from the Eastern Bloc. Generally, their sound is pretty charming, it's pretty cute, and has led to a few very good albums like their debut LP, Gulag Orchestar, as well as their follow-up, the Flying Club Cup, which I still have my CD copy of to this day because it's so fun. However, over the years I have kind of grown less enamored with Beirut's sound, mostly because their output has just gotten blander and blander. On their next full-length LP, The Riptide, those Balkan folk elements really started to diminish in favor of faux whimsical indie pop and folk, which has always been at the core of the band's songwriting to some degree, but without that Balkan spice to kind of bulk the band's tunes up, their shtick deflates pretty quickly. The band's next record, 2015's No No No, was even less satisfying in my opinion. I feel like this record was preemptively named after the reaction I had to it, as it was just a monstrously average release. And despite Zach and his band attempting to get more ambitious on the instrumental side of things with this new LP, it's not really much better. All because the horns and string sections that you usually hear on a Beirut record are just coming off very uninspired this time around. And of course, Zach is weaving in and out of these instrumental arrangements with his usual croon with a very romantic affectation on it, but I feel like he's just barely meeting the standard that he set for himself on past records though, as there's not really a whole lot in terms of emotional conviction to be had on this LP. At least I could say his vocal performances on early Beirut records felt a lot less on autopilot, and even when his singing wasn't the best, what made up for it were these fantastically anthemic and explosive horn sections and arrangements. And again, those horns and those strings, they are here on this record, but it's like their only purpose is to just provide some thickness and volume to give the illusion of compelling progression across the length of these tracks. Very rarely are any of the horn bits or string bits on this thing even slightly memorable. The lackluster instrumentation on this thing is most apparent when we get into the instrumental cuts on this record, which, I mean, if you were going to forego vocals entirely, you would think that's where the compositions would shine. But instead we get cuts like On Mano Island, which feature these sunburnt, bright, kind of fuzzy synth leads that plod along at an excruciating pace, or the song Corfu, which is named after a Greek island, but the vibe of the track sounds more like a ham-fisted attempt at a kind of left-field piece of bossa nova or something, with some horror movie strings at the very end. Meanwhile, the song Varieties and Exile feels like Beirut trying to recapture their former glory with their usual rollout of some sad little acoustic chords. Zach starts crooning, and then the instrumentation and everything subtly builds up until you get to the point where you hit the drums and the horns, and it's kind of climactic. As formulaic as it is, it's actually one of the better tracks on here. Believe it or not though, Zach does work in some sonic surprises on this record that I don't think fans would have anticipated, like on the track I Giardini, which compositionally is one of the more tedious tunes on here, but sonically, the way the instrumentation bleeds into itself as the track progresses, it's a little psychedelic, maybe even slightly shoegazy, the first time I think I've ever heard a Beirut song that evoked that feeling. And the song Landslide, which did irk me at first because I couldn't quite place what exactly it sounded like, but the plucky guitar leads along with the sunshine chords that incessantly play throughout much of the track, plus the vocal harmonies in the background, it feels like he's lifted most of what he's doing here right out of the Pet Sounds playbook, but he's trying to apply his usual romantic, croony vocal and songwriting style to it, and it's not quite working because the track doesn't progress all that much across its length. It's like it's stuck in a perpetual intro state. And these are just two songs of quite a few on this record that do bring some decent ideas to the table, but any hope of enjoying them long term is totally mired in how redundant the instrumentation is, how stagnant the progressions are, how bland the compositions and the vocal melodies are. Literally, some of Zach's most tedious and boring and uninspired vocal melodies turn up on this LP, and I'm just not really sure what to say about it. I mean, there are some moments that I think are kind of okay, a few tracks that are somewhat likable, but for the most part, this is a really tiresome album. And Beirut, at a point where I'm just like, I'm shocked that this was the same band that I enjoyed like a little over a decade ago. Because this is just so lacking in the romance and the thrill and the sensuality and the wonder that made Beirut so fantastic to begin with. It's just gone. Even what few moments there are on this thing that kind of harken to a foreign sound or influence, it feels like just really bad tourism. A little tacky, unfortunately, which I've never quite felt that way about Beirut stuff. Even though Zach was filtering these sounds into an indie pop and an indie folk style, he very much struck me as a musician who, really cared about the craft, cared about the style, cared about the sound, did his homework like a Jeremy Barnes and a Hawk and a Hacksaw, but that just does not feel like it's the case on this new LP. I'm feeling a decent to strong 4 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, music forever.